everybody. Well, welcome to the FSR Policy Debate, Competitive Decarbonized Gas Market. And we made even the second headline, what should be in the future hydrogen legislative package. I know that everybody is now very much focused on Glasgow, and there have been a lot of news from it. Some have been better, some worse, but generally I would say my expectations so far has been quite fulfilled. We have global methane pledge, we have forests, we have also today discussions on CBAM, but there was one particular issue that have perhaps been less noticed. It was emission-free steel alliance announced. And I think that was something that what we are focusing slightly today, because it's quite easy to regulate things if they are advanced. Well, just don't cut the forest or replant the forest or do things differently. But there is quite clearly, if you try to create something new and create from anticipation, and we know that decarbonized gas is a key in this pathway. At the same time, we have not so much experience. So you don't need to overregulate, not underregulate, don't forget something important, and on the EU level, use potential of EU, but at the same time, don't kill the initiatives that could come from particular member states. So it is really, really challenging issue. I even have been inspired today from one of the articles where Kyriakos Mitsotakis wrote, we must think big, act fast, and lead by example. Well, on decarbonized gas markets, clearly we have all this potential, what Kyriakos Mitsotakis has mentioned. Today we have been very lucky that Catharina Sikow-Magny, director from DG Energy, energy director at C, that is called Green Transition and Energy System Integration. So it's actually this new delivery, agreed to deliver Keynote address. She also agreed to answer some questions. So please, if you have a questions, put it in question box, and we will be very, very happy to pass these questions to Catharina after her presentation. So the first ones definitely has a bigger chance to be answered. And then we move after short introduction by Christopher Jones, professor and my good colleague, to panel discussion. I believe that panel is perfect as it could be. We have Jorgo Chatzimarkakis, Secretary General of Hydrogen Europe, and he has waited for this moment, I would assume, for 5 last years. We have Jan Ingwersen, ENTSOG's General Manager, who has already done a lot in preparing this transition with his members in ENTSOG. We have also 2 persons that are extremely interesting what will happen. François-Régis Mouton, IOGP Regional Director for Europe, that really follows these issues extremely closely. And then we have Nicola Rega, Director of Energy from CEFIC, where actually decarbonized gas could play immense role. But now, without any more from me, I will pass now the floor to Catharina Sikow-Magny, Director from DG ENER, for Keynote address. Catharina, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Adris. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very pleased to be here today with you. Albeit, unfortunately, I cannot stay for the whole meeting. Would have been extremely interesting and useful for us now. Well, first I would want to congratulate you, Adris, and Florence School, your team, on the efforts to spread the knowledge about the energy regulation and markets, and now today on the decarbonization of gases and hydrogen. Our cooperation is long-standing with the Commission and continues to be always on a very topical issues that provide us with good insight and good input for the work. The topic today, so regulation of decarbonized gas markets, is crucial for our economy, and it is also very timely because, as Adris, you said, we are currently working on a package for December, which includes a legislative proposal on how to address the decarbonization of gas markets, including hydrogen. But as you are all very well aware, the main political aim of the EU is to implement the Green Deal, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030. And this is crucial to effectively then ensure that our economy is carbon neutral by 2050. So we have a path to follow. There are, of course, many different ways to reach the end result, but the direction and the aim are both very clear. And as you said, was endorsed by COP26. Oh, sorry. I don't know if it was.
No, it was not you. Well, but now it's perfect. So sorry.
No problem. Thanks. So let's then come to the topic, natural gas, which is not accompanied by abatement of its emissions, will need to play a decreasing role in the energy mix of member states. It will be increasingly replaced by renewable and low carbon gases, such as biomethane, hydrogen, synthetic methane, among others. And this in line with technological development and the cost formation. With the proposal, with the package we made in July,
Yeah.
Okay, let's continue.
François, I'm sorry to interrupt. François, please close your mics in both your users because I see you're connected twice and it comes from there. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Let's then continue. So coming back to the package we tabled in July last summer, so the so-called Fit for 55 proposals, we made an important step for enabling the uptake of renewable hydrogen. For example, we have proposed specific targets for the lead markets for hydrogen, be it in industry or be it in transport in the year 2030. The hydrogen and gas decarbonization package that, as I mentioned, is scheduled for December is actually an equal part of the Fit for 55 package. It is the missing link, if you wish, and it covers the market design for gases. It will not deliver decarbonization in itself, but it will remove barriers and ensure that the right market framework is in place for this to happen in the most cost-effective way. For decarbonization, the July package with ETS extension, with the effort sharing regulation, with CBAM, with all the other elements, including the Renewables Directive, will together as a package then ensure that we are on the path to decarbonize. The current market rules for gas actually were created fossil gas in mind, and fossil gas is typically imported via big pipelines. The emergence of renewable methane-based gases as well as hydrogen value chain are different. They require that we rethink the rules to ensure that gases produced with new and clean technologies enjoy equally good access as natural gas and thus can play their role in the transition. We know that renewable gases and hydrogen are likely to be produced quite decentralized and will in any case be much more domestic production than fossil gas. With member states having different endowments for producing hydrogen, the availability of well-integrated cross-border hydrogen markets will be the key to support the EU climate neutrality objectives and ensure the cost effectiveness of it. But there are barriers that we need to look into. Existing natural gas networks can be partially repurposed for the transport of hydrogen, with significant cost savings compared to new build infrastructure. Such networks can, however, easily constitute natural monopolies, as is the case with our transmission grids, be it in electricity or gas. We thus need rules on the financing of hydrogen networks, the repurposing of natural gas networks for hydrogen transport, and non-discriminatory access rules for infrastructure. Otherwise, investments in infrastructure and the development of competitive pure hydrogen markets may be at risk. Although our key aim is to incentivize the uptake of renewable hydrogen, low-carbon hydrogen and low-carbon fuels have a potential for playing a role for decarbonization. They can be expected to initiate the development of hydrogen transport structure and thus also support the parallel uptake of renewable hydrogen. Next to hydrogen, the December package will also aim at facilitating the integration of renewable and low-carbon gases in the existing gas grid. This concerns biomethane injected typically at distribution level, gas quality in the existing networks, access of renewable gases to LNG terminals, and storage. It also includes topics around the integration of network planning between electricity, gas, and hydrogen networks. This legislative package, as I mentioned, is currently being prepared. We are at the full speed of finalizing the thinking process and then putting all the good ideas in the legal texts, including then the directive and regulation on gases. At this point of time, there is still quite a lot of issues on the table, and I have tried today to raise those areas where we need to act. What the final proposal then will come in December. But before closing, I would just want to mention one point which is linked to gases as well, which concerns methane emissions, which happen along the value chain and will be decisive in reaching decarbonization. As we all know, methane is a very potent greenhouse gas and needs to be tackled. Here, the COP or the G20 meeting reached quite some progress in countries pledging to reduce methane, and our December package will also include a legislative proposal on how to address methane. So this is all from my side to kickstart your discussion, and I really look forward to all the recommendations and ideas that may come today. And even if I'm not present for the whole time, I will certainly look the video right after. So back to you, Adris, and happy to answer some questions if there are.
Thank you, Catharina. It was very clear. I think as clear as statements you could make before package coming in a month's time. But I don't see too much question in the chat, and perhaps people are shy. But one question that is coming on all my heart is the issue of classical natural gas. We have had a spike of price now. How much does it influence your work in preparing the decarbonized gas package? Was it really something that completely derailed, or it is made some impact, or you would say, well, our proposal was robust enough that this spike did not particularly influence our thinking? Is it something that you could at least tell us how much impact it made on your thinking on the proposal?
Thank you, Adris. A very pertinent question indeed. I mean, you have seen our answer to the current situation through the communication or through the toolbox that we put together in 10 days, I think, probably a record time to write a communication, whereby we have also indicated that in the short and medium term in particular, we will look at the situation in the gas market from the secured supply perspective. And it was always foreseen that the gas package, in addition to looking at what I explained this morning, it will look at consumer aspects in like a mirroring with the electricity consumer aspects, but it will also look at whether there is something to be refined in the secure to supply legislation as we have it. So this work now, of course, was more, how would I say, intensified, has analyzed in more depth than perhaps we would have otherwise done the situation in the gas market, and especially the question of storage will be looked at. Whether we will include the results of these reflections in the December package already, or whether it requires further assessment is still an open question. So that we will again find out in December. But overall, I would say that we have seen that the market works. I mean, the price hike is an external shock. The situation in the storage is the result of commercial assessment, and therefore we do think that the EU market actually has shown its value, and the well-integrated market today would not lead to the similar situation we had in 2009, for instance. So that's as an attempt of answer to your question, Adris.
Thank you very much. Two questions that I have received, so I will stop so then to receive. And one is question is not so much on today's discussion, but still I think it falls under, well, DG's responsibility. Role of gas and EU taxonomy. So it is rather politically hotly discussed. So what is the current situation? Because there have been some links also with nuclear that I think it's asking. The questions come from Stefano Verde from ERA. And second is from Federico Donas, that is very much related to it, to today's discussion. So I will read the whole question. It's about industrial energy users. In the EU industry ecosystem, we have some sectors already consumer of hydrogen who are benefiting already from dedicated hydrogen pipelines, while others do not, while having the same energy regulatory pressure to consume hydrogen. How will the package support the sectors that actually have not these hydrogen pipelines, and what kind of support will be delivered for low carbon hydrogen? So basically for industrial users that has now demand for hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen or renewable hydrogen, but have not had this supply infrastructure. Will be some particular instruments for them developed, or it's up to industry to think about these things?
Thank you very much, Adris, for these two questions. So on the first one on natural gas and taxonomy, I think we all read about it in the newspapers, and you have also certainly seen our president tweet on this topic, whereby acknowledging that natural gas can play a role in the transition. From our perspective, we have certainly acknowledged this and also taken part in the discussions from the perspective. We do see natural gas having a role, but when it clearly leads to lower carbon emissions. And this situation, for instance, is very topical in, let's say, the cold regions, for instance, where the shift from coal to renewables would be too hard and impossible technically. Of course, there is a need to have more renewables, but in such situations, natural gas can certainly help decarbonize. So that is our advice on these points. But on the taxonomy, we will see again here what is coming by the end of the year, as indicated by our president. Then on the second question, so the NDA package will provide the framework within which hydrogen, be it renewable or low carbon hydrogen, should then be leveraged. The market for hydrogen, be it on consumer or on supply or consumption side, will be leveraged. This will, we have seen from our analysis, and as we also indicated in the hydrogen strategy, that the first areas where hydrogen will be developed in the next couple of years would be in these kind of industrial valleys where these dedicated hydrogen networks either exist or will be developed. And then around 2030, we start hopefully seeing the need to connect these industrial valleys across borders. And that is then we are building our regulatory framework in such a way to enable this transition to happen. So from industrial valleys in one member state to a more integrated Europe-wide hydrogen market, whilst at the same time providing the regulatory authorities the flexibility to support the development of this market in the best way. So it's again this looking at where we want to be, and then providing the tools for the regulators to support in the best way, depending on the local conditions. When we then come to the European grid, we have of course the Trans-European Network policy for energy, which also includes the hydrogen development of hydrogen grids cross-border. So that would be also a European policy framework that complements the package that we are currently working on. So I hope this answered your questions.
Thank you very much. I will pass to Christopher. That's a final question, and Christopher is very happy also to welcome you. Christopher.
I am indeed. Thank you for joining us, Catharina. So my question picks up on Adris's green steel issue at the beginning. And so the numbers that we have at the FSR in terms of producing low carbon or zero carbon steel are that if you want to change immediately to green hydrogen or even blue hydrogen based steel, you need ETS prices of 300 and something, not including the cost of actually changing the steel furnace or the cement kiln or whatever. So it's very, very expensive to do it straight to hydrogen use. Whereas CCUS is a lot cheaper because you obviously simply stick a CCS installation on an existing steel, cement, hydrogen plant that's not amortized yet. And one of the issues that we saw is that if you don't have the CCS grid and require you go straight to hydrogen, being as we're now bringing steel, cement, etc. into the ETS, they won't be able to actually decarbonize without CCS for less than 200 euros. So they won't be able to actually do anything. So you end up just taxing them at the end of the day. So how do you see the time scale linked to the use of hydrogen in energy intensive industry?
Thanks, Chris. Always very topical and difficult questions from you. What we are trying to do now we have to look at the Renewables Directive and then the ENER package together. In the Renewables Directive, we are defining what is meant by renewable hydrogen or renewable fuels in general. And with the work which is also ongoing, still putting in place on a delegated act on defining what is meant by in concrete terms. So when you take electricity from the grid, how to define whether it's renewable or not. With the ENER package, we then close the gap in the sense that we will define what is meant by low carbon hydrogen. I know that in the context of the taxonomy, this seems to be defined as anything that reduces these carbon greenhouse gases by 70% in comparison to non-abated or other areas. We are reflecting upon this definition, of course. Whether we will take it up as such or modify it is still open. So that's and these, like the renewables, low carbon, would also then need to be certified. So the whole process of certification is an important element in providing not only the information to the market, but also to provide the right signals to the market. And then accompanying to that comes the targets that we have set in the Renewables Directive for renewable hydrogen. I don't think we'll put targets on low carbon hydrogen, but I think that will be something that will come through then the ETS, despite the prices that you referred to. So this is something, but thanks for raising this issue. I mean, CCS, CCUS is certainly something that can be and should be done. We are relaunching the thinking also on these two topics through a dedicated forum, because I agree that without CCS, CCUS, we may not be reaching the objectives that we have set to ourselves.
Thank you, Catharina. It was brilliant answers, and we very much appreciate for your time. And we have a lot of interest about it. So I think the package is very much weighted. Everybody is very thrilled, and good success in preparing that the legal instrument that most stakeholders could be happy seeing. It's ambitious and also delivering on the Green Deal. Thank you very much. Now we could move to the panel, but before the panel, I would give the floor to Christopher, because we have discussed at least some issues that definitely we expect to be in the package. Christopher, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adris. So Adris, Ilaria, and myself have put together a little paper on what we think should be in the hydrogen gas package, and I'd just like to go over it very quickly. A lot of it, in fact, almost all of it, reflects what Catharina says. And I divide comments into two areas. One is definitions, certification, guarantees of origin, which Catharina just mentioned are going to be needed in the package. And the other is network issues. So in terms of definitions, obviously this is really, really important to get it right, because once you've defined low carbon hydrogen, zero carbon hydrogen, that becomes the basis for all other things, guarantees of origin, certification, etc. In fact, in the Energy Tax Directive, there is already a good definition, de facto, of low carbon hydrogen, because there is one of low carbon hydrogen derived fuels. And basically, as Catharina indicated, if you comply with the taxonomy criteria, you do comply with the definition of low carbon hydrogen. So far, so good. And if you build a new steam methane reformer and attach it to efficient carbon capture and storage, you'll meet that definition. We've only identified one or two issues here. One is we understand, but further work needs to be done on this, because we haven't seen any really definitive study on this. But we understand that if you take an existing steam methane reformer, so the people who are making grey hydrogen today, and you stick a carbon capture and storage, a CCS plant on it, and then sequestrate that carbon, you won't meet the taxonomy thresholds. We understand, requires more work, okay? If that is so, and then you exclude all the existing steam methane reformers from the possibility to be qualified as low carbon hydrogen, so you prevent them from attaching to CCS units, you are then creating an inbuilt incentive for existing captive hydrogen producers, grey hydrogen, to continue to produce the grey hydrogen and not use the CCS option. So for those plants, we would suggest you look very carefully and perhaps give only those the possibility to fall within this definition for an interim period. We would also suggest that another definition needs to be made for negative carbon hydrogen. So pyrolysis hydrogen, which is now coming to early large-scale demonstration scale, once you mix the feedstock, natural gas, with a significant part of biomethane, which more than compensates for any fugitive, any methane emissions that are emitted during the chain, you can produce negative carbon hydrogen, because obviously the feedstock may be methane, but the energy source is renewable electricity. So in those circumstances, you can create negative carbon hydrogen. Who knows what the future is going to bring? But there should be a definition for negative carbon hydrogen. This gets onto certification and guarantees of origin. And obviously, if we are going to accept that blue hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen, can play a role in the transition, you need to have equivalent guarantees of origin certificates, which can even indicate the precise level of greenhouse gases associated to them in the track and trace mechanism type thing that's being envisaged, so that they can be done very precisely. In terms of support mechanisms, and I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, we would argue that there is very considerable questions whether it would be possible, and whether from both practicality and cost effectiveness, to meet the objectives that we have in relation to renewable hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen, over the next 10, 15, even 20 years, using renewable hydrogen produced in Europe, and whether it would be possible physically to actually import the renewable hydrogen that we need. Firstly, this stems from two things. Firstly, the available of enough renewable electricity to actually do everything we need to do for electricity, direct electrification, transport, buildings, industry, and produce the hydrogen. There's a very good study by Ronnie Bellmans of the FSR that comes to the conclusion it won't work. And when you look at the numbers, there's good reason for that. So installed capacity in the EU today is 1,000 gigawatts, more or less. And the Fit for 55 package, the consequence is that we need to move from 38% renewable electricity in our electricity mix in 2019 to about 65, 66, which means we need to be almost 30% of our electricity capacity needs to be changed. So 1,000 gigawatts, so that means about 300 gigawatts. Renewable electricity is intermittent, so you'd need to install about 400 gigawatts. That's about 40,000 windmills the size of the Empire State Buildings in 8 years. So it's going to be really, really tough to do that. Secondly is in terms of cost. Today, green hydrogen is at least €1 more expensive than blue hydrogen. And in order to get the cost down, you need cheap renewable electricity. You're only going to get cheap renewable electricity if you've got plenty of it. So back to the first question. And so for all these reasons, we would argue that the support scheme mechanism should parallel that of the renewable electricity when it concerns renewable electricity, which is support schemes should in principle be technology neutral, measured on the basis of a ton of greenhouse gas saved per year of subsidy, unless it's done specifically in order to bring a technology to maturity and cost effectiveness. In terms of hydrogen networks, I can be very quick because the principles we feel are rather simple. So the basic rule should be regulated TPA, but there needs to be flexibility because the EU is going to develop in a hugely different way. Secondly, you're going to have to overbuild the network or build it to surplus capacity, not overbuild, in the interim period, so that issues such as scarcity of capacity will not be relevant in the interim. So we would suggest that member states would have some flexibility to give Article 36 type derogations, so to allow TSOs not to apply regulated TPA, but a one size fits all. And so to say that this will apply only till say 2030 doesn't work, because by 2030 you'll have a mature grid in the Netherlands and probably no grid to speak of in country X. So we would suggest that an Article 36 derogation type procedure could be applied, but that each derogation has a sunset clause of, for example, 10 years, and that would put all member states on a parallel point. In terms of horizontal unbundling, should gas TSOs be unbundled when they operate a hydrogen network. There are no real issues of discrimination to be solved here. So we would suggest that accounting unbundling is pleasant now. There's plenty there. In terms of vertical unbundling, so classical unbundling, if you like, should gas TSOs that operate the hydrogen grid be allowed to own and operate a electrolyzer? Here, obviously, discrimination issues do exist, potentially. But on the other hand, we can see some value for the TSOs to have the possibility to be involved in this in the interim. So we would say flexibility for the member states, that they could allow this for 10 years, for example, should they so wish. And after that, the classical ownership unbundling ISO ITO rules could apply. We note that the Commission and the regulators have said that all three models work well. So if all three models work well in gas, why try and solve a problem that doesn't exist? But we would suggest that all TSOs, once the 10-year interim period finishes, be allowed to choose between those three models. In terms of tariff principles, there has been an argument that we should apply the Quo Vadis model, i.e. that there should be no national entry-exit tariffs, but there should only be an entry tariff when hydrogen enters the system and one when it exits, wherever that may be. It's great in principle, but we doubt whether this will practically be possible, because it requires all TSOs to agree on the value of their relative network, as it were. So we have real doubts that that will work in practice, despite it being theoretically a very good model. I will just add two final points. In terms of financing the grid, it's a tricky one, because it will have to be built way surplus capacity, and transmission tariffs will not cover the costs, obviously, for the first 10, 15 years. So the money's got to come from somewhere. It can come from state subsidies, but we doubt that this will be able to solve the problem for all member states. Not everybody has as deep pockets as Germany, for example, or the Netherlands. And so it may be that support in some countries will have to come from some other areas. The issue has come up is saying, should, like in electricity, where electricity tariffs pay for renewable subsidies, people have said, shouldn't do the same thing for gas. It's a tough one, it's a difficult one. We would obviously prefer that the money comes from subsidies from member states, or the Connecting Europe facility, which is too small to solve all the problems. But again, we feel that some issue of subsidiarity here. The last point on grid planning, we would argue, obviously you need joint grid planning, because where you put your electrolyzers, where you put your steam methane reformers, it's very important in terms of grid planning, efficient grid planning. The existing TYNDP to PCI to CEF works very well, and the proposals as they now stand in terms of the TENI complement this very well. So we would argue that there is no problem that needs to be fixed here. Adris, I think that covers all the points that we would have liked to raise.
Yeah, that's so from our side, but it does not mean that it's exclusively. So now I really move to panel, and I am thrilled to hear from Jorgo, because Jorgo started, I think, this journey at least at 2016. So 5 years journey, now moment of truth. So are just, well, some intermediary objective achieved. So Jorgo, what do you expect from the package that will definitely make the day for low carbon gas market development? Jorgo.
Yeah, many thanks to all of you, and many thanks to the Florence School to really be a pacemaker in the whole process with substance and content here. Adris, you just said that I was waiting 5 years for exactly that moment. Basically, yes, the answer is yes, but also the Fit for 55 package, as we have heard, already included lots of elements that are helpful here to understand this whole situation. You also mentioned Kyriakos Mitsotakis, who basically reacted to, I would call it an earthquake in energy terms. It's the announcement of the Saudi Arabian government of 10 days ago, not only to turn climate neutral in 2060, but also to dedicate their biggest gas field, value of $110 billion as of 24, to exclusively hydrogen production. This is an earthquake because here you have now the volumes. Quite soon, this will not be renewable hydrogen. This will be hydrogen that we need to define, and that's why we are basically looking at this package in December. But it will come to Europe because that's the main market, and this changes a lot all these all the perspectives that we had so far. I can tell you that some elements of the EU strategy on hydrogen, like the 2 times 40 gigawatt objective, are already outdated, because we can see, just to say this as a footnote, that on a global scale, there will be much more renewable hydrogen than the 40 gigawatt that have been foreseen. Within Europe also, we will overshoot within Europe also the 40 gigawatt. By far, we can see that already right now. But there is another element that is very, very important. I think we cannot just have this conversation theoretically without taking into account what happens around us. There has been the G20 meeting. There is currently the COP meeting. And you have seen yesterday a clear commitment of the EU, especially represented by the Commission here, but also the US government, represented by the President Joe Biden, to go against methane slip. This is important, methane leakage. This is a very, very important aspect that we have to take into account here in our discussion, because otherwise we cannot discuss what it means to go for low carbon and what low carbon is in the end. We as Hydrogen Europe still believe in a very simple principle that carbon content will be the currency, and carbon content will define the price of any hydrogen. We also reiterate the 90% target. The decarbonization of 90% for us qualifies for low carbon, and anything which goes beyond should be treated as a transition and should be treated differently. In the long run, and when I say in the long run, as of 2030 until 2040, we need to achieve a no carbon strategy, not with an L, but with an N. No carbon means that we need to avoid any carbon emission, and this should be foreseen also in that package already, where we see that technologies to do that are there. Saudi Arabia has not really qualified the hydrogen that they will produce in that gas field. They call it blue, but blue is a very vague concept. Basically, there is no concept. We need to go for a clearer definition of what this in fact means. Now, with that in mind, we also need to see that we need to go with this no carbon target to the technology at the source. We need to bring the technology at the source, which means pyrolysis or ATR reformers need to be at the source in order also to avoid any possibility for methane leakage during the transport over the pipeline system. And this is something we need to take into account also with a view to the next presidency, because the next presidency will have quite a big and important role to play, not only to bring Fit for 55, well, to a positive end, most probably in June at the end of their presidency, but also to treat this hydrogen and decarbonized gases package, the December package, with care, but also to support it. We all have seen and we all have witnessed what President Macron has announced, and there is another no carbon option here that needs definitely to be taken into account. It's the big elephant in the room. Nobody dares to talk about it, but we need to talk about it because France and the French presidency will talk about it. Green will take up, but there's another bigger, not only French, but also French perspective that I would like to bring into the debate here as well. That's biomethane. Biomethane based on new possibilities to produce biomass, not only from second generation and waste ideas, but also from using not land, but the sea, using algae, a fast growing crop, to produce then, so first of all, absorb massively CO2, and secondly, to produce negative carbon hydrogen. This is something, Adris and Christopher, that I have seen in your paper that I like very much. This is very important to have clearly defined a negative carbon hydrogen, and hence also a classification of different categories of CO2, because the CO2 that we harvest with biomethane will be extremely valuable, precious, because we will need it not only for many, many processes where CO2 is needed, but also highly valued in CCUS, and here CCUS then would be biogenic and circular, and that's very, very important. And here we see a big uptake that also lets all the assets that exist today for gray hydrogen, SMR, become very relevant. They are not stranded assets anymore. They can be used for biomethane, and hence will contribute massively to the production of green hydrogen as biomethane hydrogen is defined. Let me now shortly discuss one issue which is important in this global context. That's the guarantees of origin, not only for hydrogen, but also for CO2, as I just mentioned. And here I need to say that this is the chance, and we will make this an issue at the COP26 as Hydrogen Europe at the COP26 in Glasgow. This is a chance for the Europeans to basically deliver standards for this guarantees of origin without being colonial. This is very, very important to offer this because we have some experience from our renewable, especially electricity, and treating it, and we need to share this with the rest of the globe. And I have said already, without the importation aspect, all this is not possible. So we need to base this package definitely on a global perspective, of course, with Europe as a big hub, but not with Europe being alone. Blending was mentioned in the category that I just said, no carbon as of 2040. Blending will only play a role definitely in the years 2030, well, until 2030, of course, as a transition technology, and then definitely with a digressive scope until 2040, where blending should not be foreseen as an important technology anymore. Financing, I have big sympathies for what Christopher just said, treating renewable electricity exactly the same as renewable hydrogen by taking into account the CO2 or the greenhouse gas abatement. However, there are so many sources of a proper financing and supporting scheme, and they are not only in the 10-year plan, which I'm looking forward to Jan's proposal here. They are in 10T, they are in 10E. We need to green engineer it or to engineer it. And that's what we do at the moment. We try to bring together lighthouse projects in order to overcome these supporting scheme issues. And especially they are dependent on the chicken and egg dilemma. And that's what we do by bringing together production and demand with auctioning systems on a global scale, and with levelizing costs with a switchboard called using contracts for difference. One last remark with regards to unbundling rules and others. It goes without saying that all the efforts, Adris, that we put in the decade before into this regulatory framework will, of course, be adapted for hydrogen replacing, in many, many cases, gas will be adapted the same way, but not immediately. That's not possible. Again, sympathy for Christopher and his description how this can go in step-by-step, in a step-by-step approach. Yes, the devil is in the detail, and that we need to discuss. However, the principle should be clear. in the long run, possibly as of 2040, definitely all the unbundling rules and all the grid rules that we know by today should be adapted accordingly. Thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Jorgo. You made a very good link to Jan Ingwersen, General Manager of ENTSOG. Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adris, and thanks a lot for the invitation to participate here today. I think it's a very timely debate, warming up to the package that Catharina has described. And thank you, of course, to Catharina for, you could say, lifting a little bit the shadows on what to expect, and it sounds really great. Sounds really interesting. And thanks also to Florence School for I think a very good paper with pointing out, I think, a lot of the issues that we need to relate to. There are different solutions on those issues, and I fully agree with Jorgo that we will need to discuss this both in principles and in details as we go forward. But it's important that we call and identify the key elements, and I think we are on a good track there. In ENTSOG, we have been working with this for quite a while. We have issued in 2018 our ENTSOG 2050 roadmap for decarbonizing the gas grids. We have been working with stakeholders in dialogue with stakeholders, including our Future of Gas Grids panel with a lot of stakeholders there. And we there, of course, we see the complexities and the different viewpoints of consumers, storages, producers, etc., in here. And but we do also see a great support for repurposing and finding ways to repurpose the gas grids as the most efficient way to transport hydrogen. We need, of course, and we expect the gas decarbonization hydrogen package to be a framework not only for renewable gases, but also for low carbon and decarbonized gases. We have both Christopher and Jorgo and Catharina have addressed this issue of, we would, of course, also like to see renewable gases as much as possible, but it will not be enough. We need more volumes, and we need the systems to handle that. I fully agree in the comments on the need for a certification system, guarantees of origin, also for low carbon and decarbonized gases. So we need to find the way there, and I can also fully follow and agree with Jorgo on carbon content is the currency that we need to relate to. So we need to find a good way of doing that. In saying this, that of course renewable have priorities, electrification has a high priority, decarbonization of the other sources that will still be needed is also, I think, a recognized facts gradually, that electricity will do a part of the job, the decarbonized, but also other sources are needed, and I think we are no longer discussing that fundamental fact. So that is good. We do also need to bring along, and it was good to hear Catharina also reflecting on that, security of supply has to come in, and I guess this introduction to the winter season that we have seen in Europe this year, both for electricity and for gas, is a reminder that security of supply is still an issue that we need to relate to. So I hope that will also bring this element into, we are more and more depending on our energy sources, and they need to be stable. We are depending in more or less everything that we do on energy, both on electricity and on gases and etc. So we need to make sure that we are having a secure supply. At the same time, we do also need the competitive markets to bring the lowest cost for consumers, and that is not to be forgotten in our quest here for decarbonization and renewable energy supplies. Regarding the the infrastructure, the energy infrastructure, we think, and I think it's also widely recognized that even though hydrogen will start in clusters and valleys or whatever we call it, we will very soon need to think about and to plan for the higher level infrastructure, connecting the clusters, connecting the valleys, ensuring the competition, ensuring the security of supply. And we do think here that the gas TSOs and the existing gas grid will play a very important role here. Some studies have suggested that 70% of the future hydrogen infrastructure will be repurposed gas infrastructure. So therefore, it's important, and we think that the existing gas TSOs will need to play an important and key role here and be allowed and on equal footing to invest in and to operate hydrogen infrastructure as well. I think it is the most efficient solution, not only because of the repurposing, but also how do you see the future operation of this? And to the extent that you can use also the existing organizations and operational setups for several purposes, both for operating gas and hydrogen pipeline, it is the most efficient way to do it. The discussion on which principles for third-party access and transparency, what kind of should we have negotiated or regulated tariffs? I follow very much Christopher's line here that, yeah, we need some goals for the future. No doubt we need regulated tariffs for in the future, but we do also need some flexibility, probably in the hands of the member states, with some exceptions, whether it's Article 36 or some other means. Maybe that is a suggestion, and I think it could work. Maybe there are also other solutions there. We have been also proposing to consider some kinds of cost mutualization between gas and hydrogen. I know it's difficult, but we need to find the finance to do the transition somehow, whether it's subsidies or whether you can find ways of saying, due to a more long-term use of the gas grids than would have been the alternative, then you could say it's maybe a matter of shifting value in time, but not so much. It's not so much a matter of cross-subsidization. It's more a matter of shifting value in time. And whether you then do it with incremental tariff contributions, ensuring that the hydrogen tariffs in the beginning are not prohibitive, is one option. There are other options saying you are already from the beginning creating a new regulated asset base, and you move assets from the gas asset base to a hydrogen asset base. And within the same company, within the same group, you will be able to do that on, you could say, depreciated value level, instead of having to arrange a transaction between two different owners, which will be much more complicated and will in the end also end up in higher costs, higher tariffs. So we think this cost mutualization principle should be closely considered. Of course, we see there are some complications. There should not be a free flow of money between natural gas and hydrogen infrastructure, but a controlled one, a regulated one. I think that is definitely doable. We do also need, I think, from the outset to allow the existing unbundling models, whether it's ownership unbundling, ISO, ITO, to still be possible also in the longer run. It is not so easy and not so attractive model to say that now we will have, as an infrastructure owner, you will have 5 years to operate in a hydrogen setup, and then you have to sell off or to restructure or to ownership unbundle. Let's be careful on this. This is about making the transition as attractive as possible, and low cost, and you could say low administrative and bureaucratic barriers is also part of that. And then finally, just a comment on the infrastructure planning. I fully agree. We need to do that already now. The new revised 10E regulation is on its way. We have already, before the regulation is in place, we have included in the upcoming TYNDP 22, we have included planning of hydrogen infrastructure there. Both for repurposing and potentially new projects could be included. We see this element of integrating hydrogen and gas as an important aspect. We do see that both on the infrastructure as well as on the regulation, the hydrogen and gas decarbonized gas market regulation should also be an integrated setup, because it will be so close, and we do not need further regulatory silos here. We need regulatory integration, and that is done by integrating the regulation. So we are strongly recommending a joint hydrogen and gas, both infrastructure regulation as well as market regulation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. Very clear. Wow. I'm glad that François-Régis, we could see you now. So our next member of panel is François-Régis Mouton. He's new, at least in my chairing of the events. He's regional director of region Europe of the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers. But for me, it was very important that I think François-Régis was very happy yesterday, because he's a father of the global gas flaring reduction. So in a way, global methane pledge is the next step of it. François-Régis, we are very happy to have you here. And please, I know that you have some slides, and it will be held by Chiara. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andris. Can you hear me? Yes, you can?
Yes, we do.
Okay, excellent. And apologies for the big mess I made when I first tried to connect with my computer. I don't know what was happening. And yes, thanks for your very kind intro, Commissioner and dear Andris. Yes, I'm new here, but not very much in European affairs, because I was already in European affairs when you were Commissioner. I remind you very well your excellent leadership at that time. Yes, thank you for Chiara for pushing the button on the slide. Apologies, because since I connected with my cell phone, it's not working. So this morning I'm addressing this high-level panel with my IOGP's hat, at Regional Director Europe indeed. And Chiara, if you could go to next slide. So as IOGP, we are supporting the EU objective of climate neutrality, and we are calling of the much needed implementation measures that are necessary to reach exactly these objectives. On the next slide, Chiara, please. So we consider that indeed hydrogen needs to be approached in a very inclusive way. So as long as hydrogen can help putting ourselves on the 2050 objectives, all forms of low carbon and green hydrogen needs to be considered. On the next slide, our messages are as follows. So as I just said, first, both renewable and low carbon hydrogen should be considered in a technology neutral manner. And as it was mentioned briefly by Christopher earlier on, the Fit for 55 did not address low carbon hydrogen, where green hydrogen has been largely addressed in different hydrogen strategy or Fit for 55 legislative package. At the same time, we considered that the green hydrogen should not sidetrack all the energy production coming from renewable sources. It was briefly touched about by Christopher as well earlier today. The second message is that we need an EU certification system of guarantees of origin, both for renewable and low carbon gases. And this, of course, encompasses the low carbon hydrogen. Third message is that we need to enable a competitive commodity market. What we mean by that, that we need to have different products that are being tradable be it hydrogen and encompassing low carbon and renewable, or blended with natural gas. This is true for spot market, future market, and so on. Third is the fact that indeed, and I will touch a little bit more later on in my presentation, the existing infrastructure, being oil, gas, onshore, offshore, can be reused and will be reused to transport hydrogen and CO2. And therefore, it has to be very well taken into account. And all these new networks will have to be regulated under the regulated third-party access model. And finally, there are, of course, quite a few legal and administrative barriers that need to be lifted in order to be able to inject hydrogen into the gas grid. On the next slide, I wanted to share with you very briefly what is the first study, which is a Hydrogen for Europe study from our members, Hydrogen Europe, and some others have been sponsoring, and which has been carried out by 2 research institutes working with Deloitte as a project management. So we studied 2 different pathways: a renewable pathway, which is to invest more and more, and a never-ending story into more renewables, and a more technology-neutral pathway. And we compare both of them. When you look at the next slide, Chiara, if you don't mind, you can see that on the technology-neutral pathway, first thing is to say that the energy demand, the primary energy demand, when it comes to natural gas, is more or less flat between 30-35% of market share. This is primary energy mix. When it comes to coal and oil, there is a very, very important decline starting now, actually. When you look at the next slide, you see that when it comes to the end use, it's very different, because natural gas disappears more or less, as does coal and oil. But natural gas is being used, molecules are being used under decarbonized form, in particular of hydrogen, reaching the more or less 20% of market share by 2050, being the second one after electricity, allowing the EU to reach climate neutrality objective. On the next slide, you can see, if you compare both, because I didn't want to take too much time, but just to go straight to the point, if we compare both technology diversification pathway and renewable pathway, you can reach in both pathway the climate neutrality objective by 2050. But en passant, you will save 2 trillion euros in capital expenditure. So that's the major takes from this Hydrogen for Europe study I wanted to share with you this morning. The second study outcome that I wanted to share with you is also the Restream study that was briefly mentioned on the next slide, please, Chiara, briefly mentioned by Jan earlier on. And that will be the 2 last slides of my presentation. The Restream study is a very important one. It has been carried out by IOGP, ENTSOG, GIE, Concawe all together to try to identify, is it realistic, and how much of to reuse these oil and gas pipelines, and how much of it could be reused. And actually, I would call it a first phase study, and we should do that on an annual basis, because we need to refine the first time we did that all together. And the outcome is quite interesting, because we covered around half of the offshore pipelines and 1/3 of the onshore one. And on the last slide, Chiara, if I may ask, the high-level finding of this study are the following. First, there is no technical showstopper to transport CO2 in gaseous forms, be it on oil and gas, onshore or offshore pipes. Second, most of the offshore pipelines can be used to transport hydrogen. They are very well fitted for that. Whereas 70% of the onshore total pipelines that has been studied in this study could be reused for hydrogen. So, and on top of that, the beauty of this offshore-onshore pipeline, in particular the offshore one, is to say that it will allow us to redirect actually the CO2 you want to store directly into the depleted fields, in particular offshore. And yeah, the question from that was raised earlier on by Christopher is key, because we need to have a CCUS strategy. The 11th of October CCUS forum is just a first step, but then we need to have a CCS strategy and in a way to put the CO2 back into what it was coming from. And that is more or less the end of my presentation. Looking forward to the debate. Andres.
Hello?
Yeah, we cannot hear Andres.
Hi, Andres. Is Andres with us?
Yeah, I came back. I lost connected. So, Nicola, so you are the next speaker. Nicola Rega is from CEFIC, the European Chemical Industry Council, and we are very glad that we also have voice from the industries that is not only keeping 15% of world chemical market, but also very much follows this energy transition because very much affects also chemical industry. Nicola, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andres. Thank you very much, and thanks to FSR for inviting us to speak at this very timely event. Being the last of the speaker, I also take the chance of start really commenting on some of the comments made by other speakers, so at least we really start kicking the discussion in moving forward. From my side, just briefly to say that the chemical industry, for the ones who are not familiar with the sector, is among the top 3 industrial sectors in Europe, which is using and producing actually also hydrogen in a balanced way. And we are expected to be still in the top 3 by 2030. And then depending on how the developments will go on the steel industry, will still be in the top 3 to 4 by 2050. What is important is that today our production of hydrogen is primarily or almost entirely unabated, and this is clearly not sustainable for a carbon neutrality society. We are fully behind the carbon neutrality of Europe by 2050, and we are conscious that things need to change, and we looking forward for further use of renewable and low carbon hydrogen in our industry. What makes our industry quite special in comparison with many other sectors is that for us hydrogen is used primarily as a feedstock, and that means that from our perspective both hydrogen quality and gas quality are of paramount importance, and this is the angle from which we are addressing all policy developments. Also, what is important to reiterate is that our industry is exposed to international competition. So the hydrogen and clean hydrogen moving forward will have to be cost competitive, and we are happy to be on the first movers in that direction, but we need support from policymakers insofar as this clean hydrogen doesn't become cost competitive. That clearly then we let the market run. We are open to all technologies, and we look forward for this package coming in December, because it complements these early provisions or renewable that are in the Renewable Energy Directive, and that will allow us to have a holistic approach to the whole hydrogen dimension. And I come back to that in a moment. For us, all forms of hydrogen and low carbon renewable and low carbon hydrogen are important. So it's clearly that we are looking forward for having a proper discussion about definitions, especially around low carbon hydrogen. So as also other colleagues mentioned before in the call, certification, absolutely. Also proper accounting methodology, which is relevant in Europe, but is even more particularly relevant when it comes to imports of hydrogen. Just to stress one point only is that at the consumption point, whole hydrogen molecules look the same. regardless of how they are produced. So that is also important to stress that we need to think also of from the end user perspective of how these calculations going to work out, because we cannot end up in a situation where we start receiving some volumes of hydrogen, and then when you start having all sorts of calculations and multiplicators and dividers because of whatever calculation needs to be done on the hydrogen part. That will never work. So this is one element I wanted to stress. Secondly, as a matter of principle, we see clearly value in extending all we have learned about gas market provisions. There is clear value in expanding to the hydrogen discussion as well. So all third-party access and then unbundling, that's clear. But at the same time, also like to stress that there are some differences between the gas market and the hydrogen market that we need to also be mindful about. When we discuss the liberalization of the gas market, we were starting from a market with already a mainstream production, distribution, supply, and consumption. Now we are talking about a system which will have to be created as a mainstream. While at the same time, there are some infrastructure of hydrogen, and it was also mentioned in one of the interventions at the beginning, some questions in the early phase. There are hydrogen infrastructures that are privately owned, they are local, and they are built to serve fundamentally the chemical industry in providing feedstock. Now, whether this will have to be expanded to provide hydrogen for other purposes, including energy purposes or not, that has to be seen a bit also on the big picture. That is also the question I'd like to put forward is, what is the big picture when it comes to hydrogen production, consumption, and therefore also the infrastructure that would be required to connect the two. And I just want to bring you an example to show a bit of why I'm welcoming this holistic approach with this new package. If you look now at the renewable energy provisions, the proposal that came up in July, it is requiring by 2030 that 50% of the hydrogen consumed in industry to be supplied by renewable hydrogen. Now, assuming that will be the final outcome of the process, this means in practice, and that when we will look at it from the really pragmatic point of view, that is fundamentally having electrolyzers deployed at industrial sites. Now, if that is the case, what type of infrastructures do we need to develop the moment when a lot of the hydrogen is produced on site? So all these elements of the puzzle needs to be put together, because certainly between now and 2030, we cannot expect all these pipelines to be running all over the places and supply all this renewable hydrogen. So at least this is what we have understood from the calculation done by the European Commission. My last word, just to add more spice to the debate, I could not stay away from the discussion on blending, because they've been brought forward already a couple of times. I understand there is a lot of sympathy towards the step-by-step approach. So we start a bit, then we increase, then we do a bit more and more and more. It doesn't work. And we need to be clear about that. We have a different range of classes of consumers which require have a different tolerance to blending volumes. Needs to be seen how does that work. From our perspective, we already start having problems with our feedstock the moment we start blending with more than 1.5% of the volumes. So it cannot just be that we start blending and then every consumer sorts out his own problems afterwards. We need to have an approach of where does it work, where doesn't work. And in our case, we would definitely prefer to have a separate supply of hydrogen and gas, and we sort it out on our own. But this is just a teaser. If you want to discuss further, I'm happy to pick it up in the discussion. I'll be enough for the moment because I think time is running up. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Well, we have left 10 minutes, so it would be for including Christopher, 2 minutes to each. So I will start with Christopher comment, and perhaps Chris, as you have introduced nicely the subject, and also I would mention the paper we have not yet published, so it was only seen to the participants of the panel. You start with a comment, and then one question that you would really like to hear from all participants of the panel, but that could be answered rather shortly because we would need to finish on time. Christopher.
Thank you, Adris, and thank you to all the panelists, which was absolutely brilliant. I mean, my reflection is a emerging maturity of the debate of the need to develop a cohesive and coherent wider hydrogen market, because there are so many unknowables, uncertainties. We don't know what the renewable electricity price is going to be. We don't know whether and how much renewable electricity will be available and at what time scale. As Jorgo mentioned, we don't know what the other actors are doing. As Jorgo mentioned, this announcement by Aramco is really a game changer. And if you think back to the last 2 years, there have been so many game changers in just 2 years, let alone what's going to happen in the next 30. That it's increasingly clear that we need a reliable market framework. We need a framework for an internal market for hydrogen. And I find it strange that people haven't used the word yet, internal market for hydrogen, or the phrase, sorry. And my conclusion or my observation from listening to the debate is, if you take the RED 3 and you take the new, whatever we're going to call it, Hydrogen Act or whatever, you start getting the framework for an internal market for hydrogen. And that's what kind of makes sense. Because if you try and plot where we're going to be in 10 years based on political decisions, rather than allowing the market to work, once you set the framework, and the framework is, I think, as Jorgo said, no carbon hydrogen by 20 whatever, you can say 2040, 2050, doesn't really matter. 2050 makes a lot of sense for sure. No carbon hydrogen. You can even put that in legislation. And in the paper that we did, or that we're finalizing, one of the things that we thought of was to say, okay, you can undercut the whole green, blue, yellow, pink, rainbow, whatever hydrogen argument by just saying in 2050, it has to be no carbon, and put that in legislation today. And then if anybody invests in blue hydrogen, they have to make sure it's amortized by 2050, or the technology is developed to get you there. So my question, which feel free not to answer and say something else, is what are the key issues you think need to be addressed in order to get this really efficient and functioning internal market for hydrogen that first priority, no question, gets us to 2050 with a zero carbon objective?
Perfect question. Jorgo, you start.
Many thanks, Christopher. I will answer the question. I like it very much. I think in our Hydrogen Act, we have described the 3 phases. The phase we are in now is the kickstart phase, where we need just money and the perspective on a regulation, not public money, also private money. And we can see already that privates are investing since they see that there is a clear regulatory approach. The second phase, as of 25 to 35, is the ramp up phase, where these projects, the engineering of projects will happen. We will see that prices, so to say, go down for hydrogen and demand goes up. And as of 35, we see a maturity of market, a starting maturity of the market until 2050. The no carbon issue is important for 2040 to have a clear guiding role of the carbon as a price maker. And that's how we see it. I love your word, internal hydrogen market. Yes, let's go for it. Thank you.
Jorgo. Jan.
Yeah, thank you. And I can also, of course, fully support the idea of the internal market. Again, here we see both the existing gas market and the upcoming hydrogen market as very closely related, because it will use a lot the same infrastructure or repurposed infrastructure. So there is good reasons for having the efficiency and the low cost options very close to our hearts. That will, you would say, the consumers will benefit from that. Regarding blending, Nicola, I think we are fully aware of your viewpoints. I mean, we are not necessarily promoting blending per se as the issue to follow, but we are saying in the beginning there will only be relatively low volumes. How do we distribute that and in the best and most efficient way? Is it blending? Maybe in some areas it could be blending, or is there enough hydrogen to argue for a separate hydrogen infrastructure, which is also an option, but it may come with a cost, of course. The infrastructure is colorblind, and of course we are aware of all the discussions on blue, green, purple, or whatever have you. As you say, the hydrogen molecule is a hydrogen molecule, and we leave that to the more, you could say, other discussions, but fully supporting a transparent system to track the different types. But from a technical point of view, it's the same. And then finally, there was a question on how do we foresee cost mutualization. I mean, we're just saying we think we should, because gas infrastructure and the upcoming hydrogen infrastructure is so closely related, we need to look into how can we do this in the most efficient way. We have Walter Bols, the former ACER chair of ACER regulatory, the board of regulators, have done a paper for us using some of our data from some of our members on as an example of how this could work. So I'll not go into further details here, but that I'm happy to share that. And I think it has also been shared in our gas grids, future gas grids panel. So and then we do also see other options. We do see the Dutch are doing it in a specific way, in close cooperation with the Dutch government and the Dutch regulator. Catharina has developed a system there where you could say repurposing the asset, moving from one asset base to another, and which I do also think is worthwhile looking into. So let's have an unbiased and open discussion on these issues. We understand the complexities also on the consumer side, and we are of course very much aware of we are there to serve the consumers, so that will be a very important aspect for us. Going alongside, we do also need to have security of supply and the cost efficient and low cost to consumers in the perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. François-Régis.
Thank you, Adris. Yes, I would just to come back when you were in charge, Adris, if you allow me, that saying that the regulatory framework for decarbonization of the gas sector needs to build on the achievement of the internal gas market. That's absolutely clear. And the key objective of the third gas package, completion of the internal gas market, has largely been achieved. Although we all know that it will still be necessary in diversifying supplies to some regions. But the results of all that show that the market works, and the integration of European market has been a significant benefit to European customers, and we should not lose that at all. Gas infrastructure operators should develop and operate gas pipeline infrastructure for hydrogen and CO2, matching the gas sector key network regulatory requirements, including third-party access and unbundling. This is our strong belief. You know, we are always really fighters for the market rules and the free market. There should be flexibility, though, at the national level to exempt individual single direct connections and individual CO2 pipelines used in the CCUS project in particular, on the basis of robust criteria corresponding with those set out in the third energy package. On tariff, IOGP believes that the regulatory framework should be designed to facilitate the development of dedicated hydrogen network and hydrogen markets. The development of a dedicated hydrogen network will require public support, grants, and subsidies to network operator and should not be subsidized, to our opinion, by users of the natural gas network, who are clearly against this. Regarding unbundling, horizontal unbundling rules should ensure at least separate accounting between natural gas and hydrogen activities in order to avoid cross-subsidization. And there should be no need for TSO to change their legal and or ownership structure to facilitate the early development of hydrogen infrastructure. In a nutshell, this is what we believe that is necessary to make it take off.
Thank you, François-Régis. Nicola.
Yes, thanks. Back to the question from Christopher, I would like to share both an optimistic and a pessimistic view. On the optimistic one, I think on the regulatory framework, we are pretty much all there. I think that I see lots of convergence across all stakeholders when it comes to the main rules of the market. I think I would like to say at least 80, if not even 90%, we might agree on across big spectrum. So I hope that really we can manage to go through this package as quickly as possible, so we can get the whole market into the operating part. The part where I'm a bit more pessimistic is looking at the demand side, the adaptation from the demand side. That requires more efforts on the ground, transformation, and I think looking also in all the multiple crises in which we are in. I mean, the gas crisis is bringing the link to the climate crisis that we are discussing also in Glasgow. Industrial transformation. It brings all to my point is that we need to make sure that we try to support as quickly as possible a transition from industrial basis into a new form of low carbon or carbon neutral, carbon free production processes, where hydrogen plays a key role. And I think the sooner we manage to provide these kind of solutions on an industrial basis, the more we manage to address a number of crises we are facing through, including also creating a leadership for the rest of the world by showing that this can happen. So I think there is a clear plea in making this starting from the industrial basis, because its main source of emissions concentrated in single points. Delivering it makes hydrogen makes solutions easier from that point of view. So I hope that could be a path that also member states will follow in speeding up issues in that respect. Last point, which is I think is very important, Christopher, you were mentioning the accounting part. I think we must be absolutely clear in the accounting on CO2 emissions. These CO2 emissions needs to go down across the whole value chain. There is no escape, and I think the sooner we make this accounting system clear, transparent, robust, the more the whole system will benefit out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. We would like to continue, but I think one conclusion is clear, this optimistic conclusion from Nicola, that he said, well, Commission has all the chances to come with very good proposal, regulatory proposal in December. On pessimistic, well, we know that it is not the end of the road. So it's actually, we are also only not at the start. It's true that, as I mentioned, some of you have been for years with this, but it's definitely a lot of other steps needs to be taken. So thank you very much for all the speakers. Thank you very much for Chiara for facilitating our work. And then we will see each other in the next debates or in the next events that will be organized by Florence School of Regulation. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you, Adris. Take care.
Bye-bye.